More and more, I've been trying to give you information that speaks directly to artificial intelligence, data, cybersecurity, and why it should be relevant to you. And I'm hoping to begin a series around the refinery paradox that I have discussed in other videos. If you're interested in that, I'll put a link to that here in this video, also in the description. But go check it out because it talks about what will businesses do to react to the age of artificial intelligence, what you need to be prepared to do, how to affect your career, different elements. So I'm covering that as much as I can in different elements. We're going to dive into more often news that speaks directly to that so you can start building that theory with me in real time and help me validate it as I continue to push this narrative across the spectrum. So, thanks for joining. We'll jump into it today. Today's story is really rephrased or phrased around the 280x paradox, how AI has gotten radically cheaper in terms of inference and building it, but your artificial intelligence bill should be experiencing an increase, or it should have already gone up at this time. And I'd like to know more about how you're dealing with artificial intelligence. Drop a comment in the chat or in the channel. Let me know what are your favorite tools right now. I'm going to go over my stack of AI tools and talk about what I use on a day to day basis more. If you're interested, feel free to check that out on TikTok. I do talk about it in depth and would love to get more of that content out there. So, there's a lot of information on Twitter that's going around about the artificial intelligence tools that are accessible at different foundational companies. So Microsoft is probably considered a refiner at this point, not a foundational AI company. Again, higher up in that food chain that we've talked about before. Go to the link in the bio to see that. Microsoft was said to have banned its engineers from using artificial intelligence or Claude specifically, but artificial intelligence was a mixed message there on Twitter where people are saying because in general the tokens cost more than humans. That's a story that's been copied hundreds of times, and I don't think anybody has really read that source on Twitter. So I wanted to dive into that so you can have an understanding of what we're seeing here, right? Artificial intelligence at Microsoft for sure is not being banned, as Microsoft is dropping most internal Claude code licenses by June 30th of this year. And engineers are not fleeing artificial intelligence at Microsoft. GitHub will still, GitHub CLI, I believe, is going to be the tool, the translation for Claude code specifically, but GitHub has many tools that are comparable at this point for the team at Microsoft. So they're moving to an artificial intelligence tool specifically. Engineers are shifting to what I have said. This is going to be them standardizing how artificial intelligence is committed to at Microsoft, not going away from it by any means. The real driver or the cost here is that Cloud Code ran roughly 500 bucks a month to 2,000 bucks per engineer per month for Microsoft. Unification here made financial sense for the business. I think that is pretty obvious when you look at their totality as a business, right? And it's not just Microsoft at this point. There's three data points that reveal a systematic pattern, not isolated incidents where AI coding costs are catching companies off guard. And we have seen repeated incidents of Anthropic, OpenAI, and a couple other foundational businesses changing their pricing structure where they're going like up and down and or changing the packaging and the way that you access it. I know that Cloud Code specifically just changed the way that they're allowing for their Cloud Code tools to be used in inference basis. So not necessarily prompting and using it through the chat feature in CLI, but using it in the feature of inference where you feed data through it in some sort of call out or detail there. So this is an issue, I think, because it shows that without having data governance or financial ops in place, your teams are going to burn through the results. So we see that Microsoft has already given an estimation about how much money they were spending there. That's from the Fortune publication specifically from May 22nd, 2026. Uber is said to have burned through its entire 2026 AI coding tools budget in just 4 months, right? That is a full year in just literally an over one quarter. That is according to the information from an April 2026 publication. That's astronomical. These tools are affecting the ability to be able to actually to produce real value adding work in the chain wherever you're at. And I do believe, as I have talked about in the refinery paradox, it is a skill set. It is a skill of where right now conversation seems to be being fed of a token budget. I'm sure you've heard about it, like a token budget entirely, where they're saying people have token budgets as part of their compensation packages. And that might be seen as attractive. But what I'm arguing in general is that really makes no sense to feed just as much astronomical data into the system without having a comparable plan to dealing with it and understanding the financial implications, because it is going to eat away at your ability to use it. NVIDIA, the cost of compute is far beyond the cost of employees. This was by Brian Catanzaro, the VP. His team's economics, not a universal law. And this is from the Axios report in April 2026, 2026. So NVIDIA, another company that depends upon the public buying into the feed, or the need of us all saying that this is going to benefit the overall public to really fund this work, when what we're witnessing and learning specifically from these things is that is true. We're seeing people are burning through their budgets. They're not able to adequately show the return. Let's look at this chart real quick on your screen. So something dramatic has happened that you're going to see on this chart here, that inference cost per token has collapsed at a pace that few have predicted. This is one of the most dramatic price drops in the history of enterprise software. So, right in early 2023, in the far left of our visual here, 23, you're looking at a relative cost index of 280 versus today, the relative cost index, the pressure being applied to that market is one already. I think early on, you may remember times where Sam Altman and some other CEOs from bigger foundational model companies have been saying that inference costs and the ability, or what they're saying is intelligence, would be cheap enough that anyone could afford it, basically. If this is a model of intelligence, which I am not condoning it, I'm not trying to push it on you and say that it is, but if this is a model that we're going to use and say it represents how much intelligence or automation costs, right? Then this is a pretty crazy graph to demonstrate that. Token prices have clearly fallen 280x in roughly 2 years alone. That's the fastest unit cost collapse of any enterprise technology in recent memory, according to Deloitte reporting. And yet, enterprise AI bills are going up. That's the paradox. That's what I have been discussing in the refinery paradox myself. I have been putting this out. I've been laying this out, I think, pretty clearly, right? That is part of the game for the folks who own the refinery level of this work. And if you're sitting back and you're wondering, what are you talking about with the refinery level here? Is that in comparison, the whole refinery paradox that I've written, that I'm working on as a theory, is that we are comparing the Standard Oil marketing, or the market situation in the early 1900s, for what happened, where there were thousands of competitors in the field who were willing to try to go out and make a name for themselves in oil. And Standard Oil themselves wasn't trying to go out and compete on the product level. They knew that all of that oil had to eventually hit a refinery to become useful anyway. So they went out and started to buy the refineries, right? So much so that they formed a monopoly that had to eventually be broken up. Okay. So this gives you an understanding of that what's going on. But let's talk about, why did your bills go up during this time? Right? So quite clearly, the unit price has cratered for artificial intelligence, and we're only focused on this now. So for other implications like water usage and things like that, we will get into that. I will have a breakdown on data centers where you can get more understanding of this. but usage has clearly exploded, right? There are bigger context windows and agentic workflows alone. Agentic workflows alone have consumed a tremendous amount of tokens at a rate that has outpaced the per unit drop anyway. So volume is winning every time in that scenario. And then you have near free invites being excessively cashed away. So every single token is almost free at that rate. And teams are spending thousands times more of them on tasks that may not need them. Let's just be honest. That's according to different reporting as well. But that's actually a paradox, the Javon's paradox applied in AI. And then Goldman Sachs says that projects token consumption is growing 24x on pace by 2030 alone. A usage explosion, not a cost cliff here. So the curve is steep and it's just beginning. So in general, the prices have gone up because, as Goldman Sachs with their reporting have denoted, not just the usage has really exploded in the number of licenses across the world, but per user or the most advanced users are exploding with usage on the platforms and the different API endpoints here. So much so that the businesses are clearly suffering from trying to keep up. Cloud Code has suffered so many outages in the recent 2.5 weeks here that they've been required to sign deals with people like XAI and SpaceX, I think in general. So the reckoning is here. This is not theoretical. Across these industries, executives are already waking up to the same uncomfortable math. The gap between AI ambition and accountability is real and it's measurable. 1 in 5 organizations have overshot their AI budget by more than 50%. That's from a Cloud Zero report. 73% of executives say AI investments fell short of those return on investments expectations, according to a 2026 report. Meanwhile, 70% approximately are ready to cut the AI budgets entirely if goals are not met by the end of this calendar year. So there's a tremendous amount of pressure to see these companies perform well that supply these models and these workflows. And you've probably been made aware of some of the positions that have grown, some of the careers that have grown out of this work. A forward deployed engineer, you probably heard that term more recently, where the companies who supply these models, who supply this particular service, this product, are pushing for people to go out as an internal employee, but contracted under these potential projects to work and supply this. What you should keep in mind is that expensive salary and benefits does count. But then there's also a free, basically a discounted project allocation of tokens to try to get that customer really swept under the rug or swept off their feet in terms of how they want to move forward. All of those things lead to astronomical bills. In general, the cheaper the inference gets, the more expensive good judgment becomes. Companies are blowing their budgets, aren't paying for intelligence. They're paying for the absence of strategy. When AI was expensive, scarcity forced that discipline. Now that it's cheap, the absence of governance is the biggest cost center in your organization. Strategy is not optional at less than 1 cent per token. It's more critical than ever. So let's talk about what a data leader really should be doing for your organization. The answer isn't use less artificial intelligence, by the way, right? It's definitely not fire more people. Gartner data shows the AI driven layoffs have zero correlation with higher return on investment. Cutting headcount doesn't fix the problem. The move is governance. That talks about tokens and the right size model and the reinvestment of time saved, right? So specifically having a tokens budget per team, make the spend visible, making the spend visible for your team and capping that before the bill becomes a surprise. Treating tokens like computation credits, allocate them, monitor them, hold your teams accountable. Visibility precedes control in those scenarios. You'd want to right size the model. You want to talk about how you don't necessarily need to use a frontier model for every scenario. Maybe there's a reformatting to the workflow. Maybe there's a way to reduce the cost and the token consumption entirely. And you want to talk about reinvesting that saved time. Push the hours of AI that or the hours that AI frees up of high value time into strategic work. That's where return on investment really shows up on the ledger here for any business, for any use case. Efficiency gains that stay in Slack threads don't appear on your profit and loss statement. Simple as that. Again, here's a visual for you to take that as a mental note going forward for your organizations. Take a snapshot here and make sure you have that available for your team as we go forward. So let's talk about the refinery read in general for your kind of main point to take away from this, which is that really we are in the midst of how these particular stories become more serious and they start to affect the narrative of how to adopt artificial intelligence. I wanted to make sure you had some real life examples of where artificial intelligence is being modeled at large organizations, even for ones that fundamentally are investors in some of these companies. And you get to see how it affects their workflow. So you should see how your workflow should be affected justifiably or not. Until next time.